May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Tonight we are privileged to have with us a longtime devotee of Vedanta. He's been associated with Vedanta Society here since 2010. He is an initiated disciple of Swami Yogatmananda, and he currently resides in Maryland with his wife and daughter. Sorry, that's where I was going, thank you. I apologize to Vital if he hears that. The chosen topic for tonight is Cloning God in Us. Please welcome to the Vedanta podium, Dr. Rajagopalan Rengarajan.
Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. As Swami Yogatmananda had suggested, let's begin with a short meditation, and we'll also end with a very short meditation. As part of this meditation, let us remember that every soul is potentially divine, and we are all the children of God, and we have God gene in us. And the purpose of our spiritual practice is to manifest this God gene into divinity. That let's close our eyes for about 30 seconds or so, meditate on this, and then we'll begin the lecture. Thank you so much, Ed, for that introduction. I'm sure Vital will be so excited to know that. No. Before I even start with this topic, I hope that my talk is not going to be as scary as that little boy looking at that picture. So you'll be the testament for that. So let me begin with why I'm here. So a few days ago, this little boy, Vital, my son, so he was talking to Swamiji about cloning a woolly mammoth. You know, he was trying to explain briefly what this cloning process is all about. And Swami, as usual, he was so interested in that and, excited. At the end of that conversation, then Swami said, oh yeah, we should all clone Sri Ramakrishna. And you can imagine me being a newbie and not knowing Swami well. I suggested to Swami that, oh Swami, that would be a fantastic topic for your Sunday lecture, We should have a topic something like cloning God. And needless to say, what happened? I'm right here with that same topic in front of you to talk about it. So I'll try to do. Try to tell Swami that I neither have the devotion nor the knowledge to come here and talk among like all you wonderful devotees. But obviously Swami wouldn't take that as an answer. And he told me one thing that was pretty interesting. So he told me that not to think of this as a talk, but more as my spiritual practice. So when I thought about it, it actually was true. If I spent any time, gathering content for this talk, thinking about God or God-related things, that's actually a time worth well spent. So in that aspect, I completely agree to what he said. And so today, as part of my spiritual practice, I will discuss my perspective on cloning God and cloning God in us. So this topic is rather broad, so we can discuss this topic in very many different ways. So we can look at whether this is a meaningful statement, or is that even making sense in this current world? Or we could look at, what are the views of different scriptures? What do they say with respect to this topic? We can also look at how we can do this cloning process. And the how to in itself can be further subdivided into many different ways, like, whether is it through karma yoga, jnana yoga, all those different types of yoga, or any other practices. So this is kind of a very broad topic, so I don't think I'm going to touch upon all these things. So what I'm going to focus today is start with this topic and introduce to you what cloning of God means to me, and how we can achieve through spiritual practices. Maybe I won't give all different types of practices, maybe one or two as an example that we can practice in our day-to-day life and see whether we can see an improvement with that. So with that, let me first start with the word cloning, what really it means. So I looked up in the dictionary, this is what it says: a population of identical units, cells, or individuals that derive from the same ancestral line. So if you look at this definition closely, we can see that we are all children of God. We all have God gene in us. And our ancestral line, if you trace it back all the way, it will go back to God too. So in that sense, cloning God kind of makes somewhat an appropriate phrase. And the one problem with that is, like, here it says it's a population of identical units. But we don't see every one of us as identical. We see a lot of differences. We see me and you being very different. But from the scriptures, we know that it is the Brahman that manifests itself into all these different forms. So in that aspect, again, we can think of us as being identical units. And the second definition I found there was a person or thing that duplicates, imitates, or closely resembles another in appearance, function, performance, or style. So if you take this example, we don't need to look elsewhere, but in the life history of great saints and sages. So especially if you had seen their life after the realization of God, you will undoubtedly say that, yes, the way they perform, the way they function, their characteristics, everything changes to the way in which the scriptures have described what a God-realized soul would be. So in that sense, we can become a God clone. So in either case, in either definition of cloning, we see that we have this cloning God as a very meaningful phrase. So in order to understand the process of cloning, we need to understand what cloning really means. I gave you some definition, but most of the time what we have heard cloning in this context of biological cloning or genetic cloning. And I'm no genetic scientist, so I'm not going to talk here about genetics or anything. But based on my quick web browsing and search, I kind of shortlisted in that cloning process into 4 different steps. And we will see how we can draw some parallels between the biological cloning and the cloning of God. So the first step is basically, for cloning, you need a donor cell or a cell which has a DNA in it that we would like to clone. So that's the donor cell. And then you need a recipient, which is basically any other cell, an egg cell without any nucleus. So once we have these 2 cells, that's a 2 major important ingredient for cloning, you can fuse them together. And then once you fuse them, you need to put that into a culture where the rapid cell development process really happens to turn that into an embryo. And finally, once you have the embryo, you implant that into a surrogate mother, and eventually, after a gestation period, you deliver a cloned animal. So I'm pretty sure, you all understood all that, but but let's see some of the key aspects to cloning God and how we can relate all these things back into that. So in the case of cloning God, we need a donor cell. So what's this donor cell? We want to clone God, so God is going to be the donor cell. So the God gene is already in all of us. So we don't have to really go out and search for the God gene. It's already in there. So that's taken by default. And then we need a recipient cell. And we are all the recipient cells because we are the ones who want to clone God. So yes, so we have the recipient cell. But one important thing to note here is the recipient cell has to be a enucleated cell or a cell without the nucleus. So in our case, what does that mean? So you can think of this as our mind with all the impurities, and removing the nucleus out of the egg cell can be thought of as our cleansing activity of our mind to remove all the impurities out of it. And the third step, as we saw, was the fusion of those 2 genes, those 2 cells. We don't have to worry about that. Since God gene is already inherent in us, we don't have to necessarily do any fusion. All we have to do is remove or the cleanse off our impurities in the mind. And then the other step is basically the putting it into a culture for the rapid self-development. So you can think of the satsang, the association with the satsang, as a way to rapidly accelerate our spiritual desires to realize God. And then the final step is the gestation period, after which a cloned animal is born. You can think of this gestation period as a period in which we have intense loving for God, and then we have so much longing and love for God that after some time we eventually transform ourselves from this little self into a divine self. So this process of cloning is very similar to what you have heard in Vedanta. So essentially all we are doing is cleansing our mind of all the impurities, thereby we associate our little self into divine self. One of the fancy or the interesting thing about this cloning process is, compared to the biological cloning, as you saw, it has a sequence of steps in biological cloning. You got to have this and this and this, and you got to follow one after another after another. In terms of God cloning, we don't have to worry about that. We can actually do all these steps in tandem, so in parallelly. For example, you don't have to wait until your mind is so clear and pure that you need to then have the satsang and then have the longing for or love for God. You can essentially have the love for God at the same time, have the satsang to accelerate our spiritual progress, and thereby helps to kind of cleanse our mind. So it doesn't have to happen one after another. It can happen all at the same time. In most of the cases, that's how it actually works. And then the other interesting thing with that is something similar to what Swami had mentioned in the last class. So the beauty of this cloning God, is that we actually can transform to the extent that we have put our effort into. So unlike other cloning, if you only have certain characteristics, not necessarily you're going to guarantee that the cloned animal is going to have the same characteristics. But in terms of God cloning, if we have not been able to perfect it, that's all right. To the extent that we have worked on, we are going to see the benefit out of it. And in the Gita also had mentioned that if we actually clone ourselves and we are not able to achieve this ultimate realization of God, that's all right. In our very next birth, we are going to actually continue from where we left off. So we don't have to really be concerned or worried about any of these things. And in the last Sunday lecture again, Swami mentioned about the internal purification methods. And as part of that, he mentioned what are the 4 prerequisites that is being described in the Vedanta text. So if I put a similar structure to this cloning process, I can come up with 3 prerequisites. And the first and the foremost is the faith. We need to have a faith that this cloning process is even possible. So if we don't have any faith, then obviously we won't work for it. So we need to have the faith that yes, this cloning process is possible. And then the next question comes, is this only possible for a chosen few, or can everyone achieve this? And the answer to that is yes, everyone can achieve it. And there we have the examples of many different saints from different religion, different castes, different geographical regions, male, female, everyone have, all these different saints in the scriptures and in the past and in the current generations have shown that this is not limited only to a chosen few, but every one of us can achieve it. So the second important thing is how to clone this God, so we need to have an established process for it. So if suppose somebody wants to clone an animal and if they don't know how to do it, they are not going to be able to do it. So in the same way, we need to have a process outlined as to how we want to do that. And thankfully, we have great sages and saints in the, from ancient times who have written wonderful texts. They have given us Vedas, Upanishads, Gita, and so many wonderful texts, Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna as well, which has outlined what an aspirant needs to do to realize God. So we have this wonderful text. So that prerequisite is also kind of taken care of. And then the last, but more importantly, although we have the process, we need to be able to implement those processes. Otherwise, there's no use for these things. So then this is a question. Can this be done by every one of us, or is it only for, again, specific people? Again, you can see examples of sages here. For example, take sage Valmiki for an example. He was a robber, and he had no seemingly tendencies of spiritual aspirations. But with the grace of his guru, Narada, he started chanting his japa and mantra, and eventually he became such a saint that he was able to write this wonderful epic Sri Ramayana. So such transformations indicate to us that this process is not just theoretical, but it is practical, it is implementable. And not only that, if you see all the different saints in the history and also in the most recent times, it makes us much more clear that it's not just practical alone, but it is more relevant for the modern times too. And we also have to remember this phrase that every saint had a past and that every sinner has a future. So basically it tells us that we don't have to be concerned at where we are right now. We have a chance, we have the potential to grow further than where we are now. And so these kind of these different techniques of thinking about the scriptures, looking at the different saints' life histories, kind of helps us to reassess ourselves and have this needed faith in us that yes, this God cloning or this realization of God is really and definitely possible for one and all. So although there are, and then now let's look for the rest of this talk how we can practice this. So although there are many different practices available there, and then you can see somebody interested in karma yoga and trying to use this as the practice for God realization, and there are people in bhakti yoga, and then there are some who wants to fuse all these and try to practice them. So all these, there are many different ways of doing this. What I'm going to do here is just talk about a couple of them. And maybe they might look like more related to bhakti or jnana, I don't know. But, there is no proper, distinctions between these things. You can take it the way it appeals to you. And before even I go into the specific practices, one thing that an aspirant really needs is what they call as Shraddha. So it's a Sanskrit word. And don't ask me the exact meaning, so I would rather refer to what Swami Yogatmananda said in one of his lectures. So he mentioned that Shraddha can be loosely translated as faith, belief in scriptures and in the words of our gurus, reverence and respect to our teachers, devotion, adoration, admiration, and all these put together and more. So now you can imagine what this one single word really means. It's not just faith, it has all these other attributes that goes along with it. And I'm going to talk about one aspect, just the faith aspect today. But you have to remember that this word Shraddha is much more than that. And as a spiritual aspirant, we need to develop this Shraddha. And once we have this, then any practice that we do, we can actually turn those practice into fruitful results too. So in gospel, we have seen, as Sri Ramakrishna tells us, if a man has faith in God, he will surely be saved. So one should have faith in Guru's words, faith in the name, holy name given by the Guru, and with it practice regularly. So we can actually cite many examples on the wonders of what faith does to us. In the gospel, you might have seen an example where a person wants to cross this ocean, and he took the faith of his guru's words, got a sheet of paper where it was written Rama, and then he was able to walk on the ocean. So we have seen that example as faith. It's kind of pretty old example, so I thought I'll give you a more modern example. So this is an example of, probably it's a fiction, who knows. So there's a couple, they wanted to go for a movie. And this is something like a really interesting and exciting movie, something like a Marvel movie or something, So the couple have been planning for a while that they want to go for the first show on the first day and want to go to this movie. So they went to the movie. Before even the movie started, so this wife says to her husband that, okay, I'm kind of feeling a little bit of a headache, And the husband's like, okay, yeah, I can agree. So it's not a big deal, we can go back home. And then she says, no, I don't want to go back. I want to actually stay here and watch this movie. And then it's like, okay, then just wait a couple of minutes. Let's see if the headache goes, then we'll continue. If not, we can go back. And then she says, well, it's not going. I still have a headache. And he tries to he then understands that he usually she had a fear earlier, where she always thought that she's not going to be able to make this first day first show movie. So he remembered that, and he tried to convince her with logic and said, you know what, probably you have this fear psychosis. It's not really a headache. You're just imagining it. And he tried to reason with logic. And obviously many of you know you cannot convince your spouse with logic. Experience speaks. So what he did instead, she said, well, and this husband happens to be a wonderful doctor. So he said, come on, you are such an experienced doctor. Everybody comes to you for their relief, and why don't you just give me a medicine? I mean, doctors doesn't mean they carry medicines all the way everywhere they go, but he said, well, okay, he can't directly say that to her wife. So he said, okay, let me look up. And he put his hand in his pocket, kind of searched for a little bit, and then he's like, oh, you're very lucky, I got this wonderful medicine for you. And then he gave her a round tablet. So she took it, and then he cautioned her, remember this is not an normal medicine. I prescribe this medicine only for very, very special severe migraine problems. What you have is such a mild headache, you don't need this heavy dose of medicine. So what you should do, you don't want to swallow this medicine, but keep it under your tongue or in your mouth or something. If you want, chew it, it's fine, but don't swallow it. And she was like, okay, that's fine. She took the medicine, and the movie started, and then he asked, how are you feeling? It's like, awesome, you're a magician, my headache is gone. Like, oh, wonderful, okay, let's see the movie. So the movie is over, and then they came back outside the movie, and he said, okay, what did you do? Like, that's a wonderful magic, that medicine is amazing. No wonder why people, praise you so much. You're such a wonderful doctor. It's like, yeah. Do you still have that medicine in your mouth? It's like, oh, yeah, I have it. Okay, why don't you spit it out? And she said, okay. So she spat it out. And then guess what? Want to take a guess? That was actually his button from his jacket. So he was very careful that, you don't want to swallow her because you would run into more consequences. But if you go back and see what really happened, it was actually the faith that she had on her husband in his treatment, So she had that blind faith that, oh yeah, he's going to treat me, and whatever he gives me, it's going to really, really be helpful, at least in terms of medicine. So when he did that, and what we got to learn from this is that we also have to have some kind of faith in our Guru's words. Sometimes we may kind of wonder and think, well, you know what, I'm kind of a rational person, I'm more scientific minded, and I don't really have faith or anything like that. I go more with proof and all that. But if we start to really analyze ourselves, we will actually see that we have faith in many, many, many different things. And we have to an extent that we actually take it for granted and think that those are facts, but they are actually based on faith. And even the scientists, they claim that, we want to prove everything and all that. But if you really look into their hypothesis, the way they frame the problem, the very first statement that the problem can be solved has to be based on some faith. If they don't have a faith that the problem can be solved, they're not going to even try attempting it. And once they have the hypothesis, then they look at like how we are going to approach solving this problem. That's also based on faith. Because if they don't have the faith, then why would they come up with these kind of steps to solve this problem? Well, they may not call this as faith. They will call it as assumptions and things like that. So they just use some fancy words. But if you really look at it, they're all rooted in faith. So if we have some faith in the words of our Guru, then it helps us to kind of progress in our spiritual path tremendously. So when we talk of faith, I was listening to some lecture, and then somebody gave me this another story, so another interesting story. So I thought I'll share it with you here. So this is a story of Lord Shiva and Parvati. And so this is a dialogue between Lord Shiva and Parvati. So Parvati asked Shiva, okay, so I see a lot of people come to the holy river Ganges to take dip in it. And in the scriptures, it's said that the holy river Ganges relieves of all the different sins that a person might have committed. If that is the case, then all those people should have been, turned very good, and some of them should have been liberated. But I see only very few who actually were liberated. So is this not true what's said in the scriptures that the holy river Ganges actually relieves people of sins? And then Shiva calmly answers and says, well, that's true. The holy river, whatever that's said in scriptures is true. The holy river Ganges actually relieves you of the sin. But how many people really do? And to that, Parvati was kind of a little puzzled. It's like, how many people? I see millions of people go. I don't know if some of you had been to India during Kumbh Mela season. There's like millions of people going at the same time into a very small region and then take a holy dip in Ganges. They have such strong beliefs. So she says, well, I see so many millions of people taking a dip in Ganges. So what do you mean that how many people really do? So then Shiva says, okay, if I have to show you, then we both have to take a form and go to earth. So they take a form, go to earth, and the form they took is like kind of pretty interesting. So Shiva took a form of a very old man, and Parvati as an old woman. And Shiva is not just old man, but he's completely disfigured. Like his hands are kind of not in its place, and the face looks really ugly, and all that. And they are just about few yards from the Ganges, from the bank of the Ganges. And so then Shiva, let Parvati ask those people who come there to take a bath in Ganges for help so that they can lift him from where he is to Ganges, to the river. So Parvati said, okay. So there were a few people walking along that side, and she asked, okay, can you please help us? This old man is my husband, and he cannot really walk. So why don't you just lift him and keep him near the river so that he can also take bath in Ganges? And just looking at him, they were like, no way that we are touching him, no way. So they just walked past. And then Shiva nudged her and said, okay, now entice them more. Okay, then she said, okay, let's do. And when the next group of people came, then she said, well, my husband, he can't really walk, so if you don't mind, please lift him, and for exchange, I'll give you 100 sacks of gold. And some people are like, wow, okay, so that's an easy way of earning money, right? So they're like, okay. And some of them, they still didn't want to even touch him or come near him. And some of them, I was like, maybe, but I don't trust, and things like that. But, a couple of them came and said, oh, yeah, we can do that. And then Shiva told, okay, did you also tell them the condition? And Parvati was like, what condition? Then Shiva told that person, well, there is one condition. I have been cursed that anybody who touches me or takes me to the Ganges is going to accrue all the sins that I have. So basically, all my sins are going to be transferred to you. And hearing those guys, that's it. They rushed out, they didn't want to even come near. And so Parvati and Shiva was waiting there for a long time, trying to kind of find at least somebody. And then eventually Parvati gave up and said, well, now I see, I don't know why nobody wants to do this. I mean, you're going to Ganges and you are there and then Shiva says, yeah, that's right. These people, they say that they have faith in the words of scriptures. They say that, they have faith that this holy river is going to relieve them of their sins. But in their practice, that's not what it shows. So if they are going to accrue all the sins from me, when they take the bath, they're going to get rid of everything anyways. So, adding extra sin is not going to really be a problem, but that's not how they live their life. And that is why, you should, not too many people get liberated, although it's a true statement. And then Parvati was like, okay, so I'm pretty curious as to if this is the case, then why should we let Ganges flow on earth? I mean, nobody is seeming to have any faith in the scriptures and all that, and yet we should have this Ganges on earth. We should probably take it away. And then Shiva said, well, just wait and see, you will know. And just then a young boy came there, and then, he said, well, then the Parvati asked the same question, would you lift him? It's like, oh, mother, sure, no problem to me. It's like, do you know the condition? Well, whatever the condition is, you're going to get through all the sins. He said, no problem, I'll take him. And he was like, but, we will give you only 100 sacks of gold. He said, I don't need anything. Why should I need anything? Then it's like, but you're going to take all the sin. Isn't this a problem to you? Then he said, well, why should it be a problem to me? I'm going to get rid of my sin anyways. And if I accrue more on the way, that's fine. I'm going to get rid of everything. This Ganges is really so holy that it takes everybody's sin. So why would it take mine? So, I have nothing to worry about it. And, then we don't need to say further what happened. Then Shiva and Parvati gave them the real form, showed the real form to him, and then blessed him and all that. So, but what's so interesting about the story is that we all hear about faith. We all know what faith means. We all understand what faith is. And we think we have faith. But when it comes to living, do we really have the faith in God and live our way the way it should be? And if we actually ask this question to to every one of you, yourselves, you will see that it's not the case. I mean, we don't really live the way the faith the way these people have mentioned what faith really means. So we have been living thinking that we have faith, but not really the way that faith really should be lived with. And if that's the case, then obviously we have been chanting the name of Lord so many times, and in so many scriptures it said, repeating the name of Lord once with faith will relieve you. And here we see we are still, embroiled in all this worldliness. So that itself is a testament to how much faith we really have when we talk about this faith. But that's not a problem. Why then we should be talking about this faith? Because when we talk about this faith, so what happens is we kind of understand it. So for example, the story, we understand that the way we want to live should be with lots of faith in God and all that. And then we kind of have some feeling to it. Eventually this understanding and feeling will eventually lead us to kind of remind us to walk in that path of faith, and then, eventually get our goal. So all these stories, although seems like just stories, they will actually help us and guide us for our spiritual progress too. And so with that, let's go into the 2 spiritual practices, or maybe 2 or 3, depending on the time that we look today. So far all we have seen is what God realization mean, and then as a spiritual aspirant, we need to have faith. And let's look at the practices. So one of the interesting practice that I think is probably not taken too seriously, maybe is this Nama Japa, that is saying the name of Lord. I mean, we all have been either, if we have been initiated, we have been given some mantra. And how many times have we really repeat it, and how do we really repeat it with so much sincerity? If you look at it, we don't. And here is a quote from Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and this is Sri Ramakrishna saying about what Chaitanya Maharaj has said. And Chaitanya Prabhu says, "The name of God has very great sanctity. It may not produce an immediate result, but one day it must bear fruit. It is like a seed that has been left on the cornice of a building. After many days, the house crumbles, and the seed falls on the earth, germinates, and at last bears fruit." So every time we repeat the name of God or mantra given to us, something really special happens in our mind. So it creates a very deep impression in our mind. And when we repeat this again and again and again, so what happens is it helps us to remember God more frequently. So this kind of name Nama Japa and all that is very, very powerful, and we shouldn't be taking it very lightly either. And there are wonderful stories in the Puranas about how powerful this Nama Japa in itself is. And there are so many examples. I thought of quoting one example from Ramayana. So there are at least 2 incidents, especially about Nama, how name of Lord is much, much more powerful than Lord himself. So this is one of that. So when Sugriva's army were constructing this huge long bridge from India to Sri Lanka, so they had basically rocks to construct, and obviously every one of us here know rock would sink in the ocean and it wouldn't float. So what they did was they wrote the name Rama on rock and then threw it on the ocean, and then with so much faith and said Jai Shri Ram, and then they threw it in the ocean, and to their surprise every rock actually was afloat. It didn't sink. So all the different soldiers, Sugriva's monkey soldiers, came and did that, and everything was afloat. Even the squirrels and so many other animals did their part, and it was such a wonderful thing for Rama to see. And Rama was thinking, well, you know, all these great people are helping me to construct this long bridge. Maybe I should do something, you know, just like these politicians, they come with some broom or something and try to clean up and then take a photo so that they can put a big article as if they did something great to the society. So Rama thought, not in that aspect, but Rama thought like, okay, maybe, you know what, I should probably do something. So he didn't want to start out big. So he took a small stone and then he said, just threw it. And to his utter surprise, it actually sank into the ocean. And he was like, what is happening here? Me, Rama, who's throwing the stone, is sinking into the ocean, whereas these great, Sugriva soldiers, writing my name on it, throwing it, but it's all afloat. So what's happening here? And he was kind of a little embarrassed to see that. So he was looking around to see if anybody noticed it. And who else? Hanuman, who's always by his side, he noticed it. And, you know, he kind of had a smirk on his face as to like, yeah, I know what happened. And then Rama, you know, couldn't do much. So he called up Hanuman and said, hey, Hanuman, I understand this, that the stones that you guys throw actually are not sinking, whereas the one that I did actually sank. Then he tries to explain to Rama, oh Rama, the reason the stones that we throw actually doesn't sink is because we write the name Rama on it. When we throw it, we have so much faith that that Rama himself is going to actually keep that afloat. Whereas the stone that you are throwing, you neither have the name nor the faith that associate with that name. You are just throwing, even though it is you, you know, it doesn't matter. It has to be the name and the faith that goes with it. That actually what keeps this stone afloat. And, you know, then Rama tried it and then it worked and, you know, and so on and so forth. But I mean, here it's not to belittle the, you know, the glory of Rama here, but it is to kind of show how powerful the name of Lord is. I mean, it can really do wonders. And we have seen in the life history of so many great saints, even we can start from Shraddha Ma, like she said, 100,000 times that she does her japa every day. And then we have so many other saints like Tyagaraja and so many other saints who have been doing nothing but repeating the name of God. And they also had the same vision and the realization of God. So this shouldn't be taken really lightly. And so that's the practice of repeating the name of Lord. And then the second practice that I will talk about is training our mind to connect with God. So I'm not sure how many of you here are computer programmers, but there's a concept called pointers in computer programming. So in essence, it's basically a way to point to an object or something. In a simple term, you can think of this as an index in a book. So the index actually points to something in the book. But it can be a little bit more complex, that an index points to another index, which can point to another index, and so on and so forth. So, but you get the idea, right? So what essentially is happening in our brain is pretty much the same thing. So if you look at what's happening, the first thought triggers another thought, and that triggers another thought, and then it goes on and on and on. So what, for example, while I was talking here, some of you might have been captivated with that story in Ramayana, that you might still be lingering in a thought in Ramayana, and you might still be in that zone. And maybe somebody came back, but I don't know. So, you know, this is how our brain essentially works. So we travel from one thought to another thought to another thought. So, for example, if this was, say, January, and I was making this statement, hey, did you see that game last weekend, the Sunday game last weekend? And if any of you here were a football fan, immediately you would think, oh, that was a playoff game. Okay, who played? And this person and that person. It was an amazing touchdown. And you literally actually traveled to the week before. You are living in that week before. You are visualizing pretty much everything that happened, all because of just that one trigger word, that is game. Did you see that game? Did you see that all that is missed? Just that game triggered you to travel you all the way back to a week. This is the power of our mind. Our mind travels so fast. I mean, imagine if the light has to travel a week, it takes whole full week. But if our mind has to travel, it takes an instant. Not just week, we can go years past, in no time at all. So this is the power of our mind, and how we can put this mind to a better use. This is what the practice of training our mind to. Say, for example, we have to do this consciously unless it comes out unconsciously. Maybe for some people, it's under the awareness that it comes so naturally. But as otherwise, we have to train it in a conscious way. So, for example, if I say, I went to Providence. So we can, again, work on the same way. I went to, discard all that, Providence. The moment you hear the word Providence, then you can consciously trigger another word, Vedanta Center of Providence. And then the moment you go there, Vedanta Center of Providence, then you take your mind to that level and then say, Vedanta Center of Providence. Oh yeah, I know that building that's right there in Angel Street. And then you take it a step further. Yes, oh, I remember that minister of that Vedanta Center, Swami Yogatmananda. And then you start to think more about him. And it's like, oh, that Swami, how graciously he welcomes everyone. He loves so much, to talking with people and helping them with their spiritual progress, and how compassionate he is. So you start to kind of dwell on some of those attributes of Swami Yogatmananda. And by doing that, you can either stop there or take a step back and say, you know what, I really like that. I'm going to love everyone just like the way he loves. So at least today, I'm not going to be angry with anybody. I'm not going to hate anyone. I'm going to love everyone for the rest of the day. So you can make some kind of your own conviction for the day or something. Or you can take a step back, and then when you are with Swami Yogatmananda, then you can say, well, oh yeah, I remember where he took me to the basement for a cup of tea. Oh yeah, that's right. That time the tea was really wonderful. And oh yeah, that's right. There's a kitchen right next to it, and they cook wonderful food there. And you can start dwelling in the food and all those things. And I'm pretty sure there won't be any triggers to come back. But you can go along that line, or you can just take a step back and then say, oh yeah, that is in the basement, but what's up in the first level? Oh, that's a beautiful shrine in the first level, right? And look at those wonderfully decorated shrine. Oh, look at the lamp that's been lit, and how meticulous and how much devotion those devotees must have had to make sure the wick is right, there is enough oil in it, and all those things. And you can also look at the beautiful arrangement of flowers, how much devotion that the person must have had to pick that kind of flower, and with so much artistic and meticulous characteristics that goes along with that, and the devotion that goes with it. So when you start thinking about it, so what actually happens is you get inspired from their devotion. And you can either stop there, and then, or you can just again make a conviction out of it, or you can go a step further and say, oh, look at that, there is this wonderful shrine. Right in the center is Sri Ramakrishna, sitting in such a fantastic pose, and then he's having that great smile that you cannot see anywhere else. And then suddenly it triggers another thought. Oh yes, I remember in Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna where it says that Sri Ramakrishna had the smile from Mother Sita herself. And then oh yes, what does Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna tells us? So you basically start dwelling more on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and then you take those wonderful messages and then start to think about it and say, okay, for the rest of the day, I'm going to try to apply at least one aspect of that. And then you try to kind of remind yourself every hour or so and say, you know what, I failed maybe last 20 minutes ago, but for the next 1 hour, I'm not going to fail that. And then you kind of try to slowly apply this thought into your brain, into your mind in such a way that you can actually try to do this more consciously. At the same time, you may not see the result at the first few trials, but that's all right. But try to do the same flow repeatedly. So you start with something, and then slowly move on towards God, closer to God, and then eventually merge in some of the messages of God, or with God, or God's attributes, or the devotees of God, any of those things. So one wonderful thing that really happens with all these things is basically when we do all these things, we create actually a specific neural pathways in our brain. So this is what the scientists these days, they call it as procedural memory. In layman term, it's called muscle memory. So many of you might have heard, if you are in sports, you might have heard of this term muscle memory. Say, for example, a pitcher is throwing a baseball. The ball travels almost like about 100 miles an hour. It's so fast, and the person doesn't have enough time to actually trace the ball and play his shot. What he has to do is he just swings. And how does he swing? He just swings based on his own assumption and practice. And by the time the pitcher throws, by the time the bat comes, they both meet, and then it's a home run or out or whatever. So what is actually happening in the part of muscle memory is basically this. It's not the memory of the muscle, it's the memory in the brain. So what brain does is, any activity that you frequently access or do in a specific fashion, it creates what is called a special neural pathway for it. So the task, anything that you have to do that is so similar, it does it without even you being aware of it. You all actually do this all the time. For example, when you're driving your car, if you're commuting to your work every day, you'll be sitting in your car, you would have started your car and then start to drive. You would be driving in the same road with this almost different kind of traffic patterns, but you will be still driving it. You reach your destination, and while driving, you might be listening to a song, or you might be doing something else. When you reach the destination, you might be wondering, how did I come here? I'm already here. And you have no awareness of all the different things that happen on the road. But yet you know that you drove, yet you know that you saw all the cars, yet you actually did everything that's needed, hopefully, so that you can be a safe driver. So what happens here? So we all actually experience these things, and we actually do all these things, except that we don't really we are not mostly aware of it. And this is basically what this muscle memory basically means. And imagine now, coming back to this, any specific word like providence, we said, maybe it doesn't have to be a word. Maybe somebody gave you a sweet, you took a sweet, and then you can connect that sweet to say something like jalebi. And then from there you can connect to, oh yes, in Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the jalebi was referenced many times. Oh, then Sri Ramakrishna must like that. What else he likes? Oh, he said that have a faith like a child, so I should have a faith like a child. So, you kind of traverse very quickly from something really, really worldly and material, and then move up all the way into like something like gospel or Sri Ramakrishna or any other God for that matter. So essentially what we do when we do this, we actually transfer ourselves from this normal worldly things to the realm of Sri Ramakrishna Loka per se. You actually dwell there. And this is a very good practice. So what happens if you do this practice consciously, many times, regularly? This becomes your unconscious awareness. It will become your unconscious way of acting. So the moment somebody tells you something, and immediately that word will connect you to, God. So here's another example. I thought about it again, in traffic driving. So when we stuck in the traffic, suddenly we see so many cars in front of us, a big, huge traffic jam, and then we start to fret about it and wonder why everybody in the world or everybody in the state decided to go on the same day that I want to go on a vacation. Why there is so much traffic on the same direction that I want to go on the traffic. I want to go to my destination. And, you kind of wonder about this. And sometimes we even come up with all these ideas, what, they should have this and this and this and that. And by that, the traffic would be reduced significantly. Maybe they should have more public transport or something like that. We spend our time pretty much thinking about all these wonderful ideas as if we can solve those problems. But, so this is how we spend our mind pretty much. So now imagine we kind of put a conscious thought to this. So we see the same traffic again. We see the cars lined one after another. Immediately we see, oh, this lining of one after another reminds me of devotees standing in the queue to visit the Lord or have a darshan of a Lord. I mean, I'm not sure how many of have been to the temple in southern India called Tirupati. There are literally millions and millions of people wait in the queue to have darshan of the Lord. There's a form of Vishnu there for literally few seconds, less than 5 seconds. And people sometimes walk days to come there, wait for hours or even sometimes days to have 5 minutes of this darshan. So when we look at this queue in the traffic, we can just say, look, this is the same way lots of devotees are waiting to have the darshan of Lord. And imagine the devotion that those people must have had to spend so many hours, but just to get that few seconds of his darshan. Then immediately that time you can convert that into a prayer and say, oh Lord, help me so that I shall also have that kind of devotion, that kind of patience that these people have, so that I can also have your darshan, something like that, a prayer like that. Or you could say, oh Lord, let me have that kind of patience to just to overcome this traffic. So in any sense, if you look at what really happened, this is really an advantageous situation here. So you can derive 3 different benefits out of this kind of thought. So the first thing is we are connected to the devotees. So when we are connected to the devotees, then basically we start to kind of imbibe the characteristic of what a devotee would like to have with respect to his God. So we kind of get that. And then the second thing is, in we thinking about these things, we probably spend 5-6 minutes, and by then the traffic might have really been going smoothly. So you actually didn't even think that the traffic was there. So it helps you in that problem as well. And then the third and important thing is, you start to see everybody as devotees. So when you start to see everyone as devotees, the one major thing that you kind of tend to do is that you don't try to see their faults. So instead you kind of think of them as a devotee. So imagine Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sardama especially, how many different types of people came to meet her. People of all different types, people who are robbers and devotees and saints, normal people, people like me, people like you guys. So everybody came, yet to her, everyone were looked upon as her own children. How is she able to do that? So what she was doing, I think, is actually seeing the divinity in every one of us. Not really the person that we are, not the fault ones, or not the ones with so many faults and problems and all that, but she was able to see the divinity in us. And imagine that we actually start to see people as devotees. There's a great potential for us to kind of imbibe some of those traits in us. Then we start to actually see more people as people of devotees, and so they, even if there's a fault in that, then it doesn't really come to you. So then we actually can follow what Holy Mother said, that never find faults with others, right? So it can be much more practical for us. So, okay, I still have a few minutes. And so I'm going to just tell you one short story maybe. Of course, if you're interested in that. Okay, thank you. I'll take that as yes, although I didn't know for sure what you said. So sometimes when we sit in meditation, all different thoughts comes to us. We kind of travel around everywhere, and sometimes we wonder, what is this? I'm sitting here in, say, meditation or in puja, but my thoughts wander somewhere else. And we have seen suddenly the thought of gospel comes, and then we have seen in gospel how Sri Ramakrishna did not like that, and he slapped Rani Rasmani because, she was having her thoughts somewhere else than in the temple. And we kind of it's not really a fear, but we might actually get demoralized sometimes and think, what is going to happen to us? We kind of not really able to do what is being suggested by Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and our Guru. So what's going to happen to us? So sometimes we get so demoralized that we want to even move away from that. But here is where a different kind of thought can come to help. At such circumstances, what we need to do is we need to replace this kind of negative thought with a positive thought. So imagine that we kind of start to think about, oh yes, I know Sri Ramakrishna, he's very compassionate. although I'm kind of having these kind of mistakes and I do these mistakes, he's going to be still compassionate. He's not going to disown me. So, something like that kind of helps. And when I talk about this compassionate, that's where the story I heard recently comes to picture. So this is a dialogue between God and a very wonderful devotee of South India. So he lived it 2,000 years ago or so. So this is a conversation between the God and the devotee. So as usual, the devotee is praising this Lord wonderfully, and Lord is very happy to hear all that. And suddenly he says, "Oh God, you are not a Sarvagnan." So that word Sarvagnan means knower of all. And this God is taken back. What do you mean? Like the Upanishads, the Vedas, everything says that I am a Sarvagnan, and you are not. You are saying that I am not. Well, you are such a wonderful devotee, no doubt. But if you keep preaching this way, then the generations after you is going to follow the same thing. So I need an explanation here. Then he says, well, you are a Sarvagnan because you do not know the limit of your compassion. So that is why you are a Sarvagnan. And God is supremely happy. Like, it's such a great testament to God's compassion that, yes, I don't have any limits. I do not know the limits of my compassion. So God is super happy. And immediately said, no, you are a Sarvagnan. And now God is really worried. He's kind of a little bit trembling. It's like, okay, I accepted that I do not know the limits of my compassion. But now you are saying I'm a Sarvagnan, I'm the knower of all. Does that mean that I know my own limit of compassion? Did you see any example somewhere that you found the limit of my compassion? And then God is like, no, you got to really explain this time as to why you said that I am a Sarvagnan. I accepted I am not, but now why are you telling me that I am? And then the devotee said, well, you can only know of something that really exists if there is something called a limit to your compassion, and if that exists, then you are a knower of, you are non-Sarvagnan. But there is nothing called limit. So there is no term called limit to compassion. That does not even exist. So if something doesn't even exist, how can you know about it? So you are a Sarvagnan again. So, so this is kind of a wonderful statement. I mean, the story is something, nice in itself. But what we can look at from our perspective is the compassionate God. How compassionate He is. He doesn't even know, or there is not even a word that says there is a limit to compassion. So that compassionate Sri Ramakrishna, why is He going to disown me? So not. So kind of use such positive thoughts to bring yourselves back up. Okay, I think I'm pretty close to the end. So I'm going to kind of wrap up here. I don't know if you want a summary of all the things I said, but if you don't care for it, then I'm going to continue. You need a summary? Okay. All right, so just to summarize here, we started with cloning of God. We tried to see what cloning really means, and essentially said that cloning God can be very similar to cloning an animal. And, the only difference being like it doesn't have to be sequential. We can do at the same time. And it's not it's not something like you have to, it's not that if you don't achieve it in full that you don't get any benefit out of it. You get the benefit to the level of effort that you have put in for your transformation. And in essence, cloning of God is nothing, it's just a fancy word, but all that means is working towards the realization of God. So, transforming your inner self with all this ego and deficiencies and everything with it, transforming that to a divine self. That's all what cloning really means, in my perspective, of course. So we saw that, and then we said, well, we understand this. It requires faith and few other things to go along with it. And we saw that once we have the faith and in that the cloning process is even possible, then all that we have to do is take necessary steps to go with that. And that necessary step is nothing but spiritual practice. And we didn't see quite many spiritual practices today. We just saw a couple of them. We saw one, which is Nama Japa, how the power of Lord, name of Lord can really help us to progress ourselves in our spiritual path. And then the second thing we saw was how we can train our mind consciously. So everything that we hear, everything we see, how we can start to link that back to something either with gospel or with Sri Ramakrishna or any of the attributes. So those are the things that we saw today, and as part of that, we also saw why a spiritual aspirant needs to have Shraddha and what Shraddha really helps them to, how it propels them to progress further. And with that, I'll almost gonna conclude. But before I conclude, I want to make a couple of disclaimers here. So number one, none of the things I said here, anything is original. Obviously, you all know that. It's nothing from me or new. It's all some things that I have gathered from other Swamis, other lecturers, and other great speakers. So I owe a lot of thanks to them for any content that I have prepared today. And then the second and more importantly, although I stood here and spoke to you, I actually see myself sitting there with you, listening to what I just said. So what I basically mean by that is all the things that I've said today is more and much more applicable to me than to any of you. So I see myself as me hearing it, trying to take it into my own brain and trying to tell myself that, yes, this is how I want to be, this is how I should be. And so, if you found something as if I tried to kind of impose onto you, don't take it personally. And yeah, you're all such wonderful, great, spiritually advanced devotees here. And I really, really thank you all for coming in here, hearing my speech, and more than that, helping me with my spiritual practice. And with that, I conclude. We'll have a short 30-second meditation, and we'll conclude after that. कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यत् सकलं परस्मै श्रीमन्नारायणायेति समर्पयामि. सर्वं श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु. Thank you.
So thank you to Dr. Rengarajan for a very interesting and engaging talk on cloning God within us. Programs for the week will go on as usual. Swami Yogatmananda is in Oklahoma and will be returning on Tuesday. The Tuesday and Friday classes will go on. The morning programs will go on. This coming Saturday is the retreat with Swami Savapriyananda from New York. Now it is sold out, so if you did not register, it is too late to do so for that particular retreat. The topic next Sunday is Be Light Unto Yourself, and that will be given by Swami Yogatmananda. Now recite the closing prayer. After the prayer, we'll have arati, followed by soup supper, and then you'll have a chance to meet Rajagopalan down in the corner. As per our tradition, he will also be staying for soup supper, so you can continue the discussion with him at that time. May the Divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.